Imagine standing on a beach at dawn, the water calm and glassy, when the ground beneath your feet begins to hum. Not shake yet, hum, like the earth is clearing its throat before it screams. Within hours, an entire city of 10,000 people will cease to exist. Not burned, not conquered, but pulled under, whole, in a single night. Somewhere beneath that water, families are still asleep. They have no idea this is the last night of their lives. In the winter of 373 BC, a thriving Greek city called Helike vanished so completely that for centuries afterward, sailors swore they could look down through clear water and see the ghostly outline of temples and bronze statues still standing upright on the seafloor, as if the city were simply waiting for someone to come back and turn the lights on. This isn't folklore stitched together from superstition. It's a documented disaster, described by ancient writers close enough to the event to speak with survivors, and it may be one of the earliest natural catastrophes in human history recorded with something close to journalistic detail. Yet almost nobody has heard of it. Pompeii gets the documentaries. Atlantis gets the movies. Helike gets silence, even though its ending is arguably more sudden and more thoroughly confirmed by both ancient testimony and modern archaeology. Stay with me, because by the end of this video you'll understand exactly how a city gets erased in one night, why the Greeks believed it was divine punishment, and how, nearly 25 centuries later, archaeologists finally found Helike's remains buried not under the open sea as everyone assumed, but sealed beneath a coastal lagoon, exactly where the myths and the science quietly agreed all along. To understand how Helike died, you have to understand what it was. This wasn't a minor fishing village. Helike sat in Achaea in the northern Peloponnese on the southern coast of the Gulf of Corinth, in what is now Greece. It was the leading city of the Achaean League, a federation of city-states that later shaped Greek politics, and in earlier centuries it had been powerful enough that other cities treated it almost as a mother city, a place of origin and authority. Most importantly, Helike held one of the most sacred sites in the Greek world outside Olympia and Delphi, a great temple to Poseidon, god of the sea, and critically for this story, god of earthquakes. The Greeks called him Earth Shaker. Other cities sent tribute and representatives to honor his temple at Helike. Keep that detail in mind, because everything that follows will feel, to the people living through it, less like a natural disaster and more like a message. In the days before the destruction, the ancient sources, including the geographer Strabo drawing on earlier accounts, describe something unsettling. Snakes, rats, weasels, worms, and insects reportedly fled the city in a mass exodus. This is one of the most chilling details in the whole account, and not just for dramatic effect. It echoes something modern seismology has actually documented elsewhere. Animals sensitive to subtle ground vibrations or gas release sometimes flee an area before humans notice anything wrong. The people of Helike did not leave. Whether they saw the animals go and dismissed it, or never connected it to danger, they stayed in their homes, going about ordinary life, unaware the ground beneath their entire city was quietly coming apart. Then came the moment ancient writers treat as the final provocation, and it reads like a morality play because the Greeks intended it as one. Envoys from Ionia had come to Helike. Some accounts say seeking aid, others say seeking a sacred object from Poseidon's temple, since Helike's shrine was treated as an authority for such religious rites elsewhere in Greece. The city refused them. In the harsher versions of the story, the citizens of Helike mistreated or even killed these visiting suppliants, men who had arrived under the protection of the very god whose temple stood at the heart of the city. In the ancient Greek worldview, this was close to the gravest offense imaginable. Suppliants were sacred. Harming someone under a god's protection invited that god's retribution. So when Helike, Poseidon's own city, was destroyed by the very forces associated with Poseidon himself, the Greeks didn't see coincidence. They saw judgment. Whether or not you believe in divine punishment, this narrative is why the story was retold for centuries, as a warning about pride, and about the danger of believing your city is untouchable. Now to that final night, because stripped of the religious framing, the physical event itself is almost unbelievable in its speed. In the winter of 373 BC, with no warning beyond animals that had already fled days earlier, a massive earthquake struck the region in the middle of the night, catching nearly the entire population asleep. Stone temples, homes, public buildings that had stood for generations collapsed almost instantly. But the earthquake alone isn't what erased Helike. Within moments, in some accounts almost simultaneously, a tsunami surged in from the Gulf of Corinth, generated by the same seismic violence that had just leveled the city. Ancient accounts describe this wave as large and forceful enough to completely inundate what remained of Helike, dragging the wreckage, and most of its people, into the sea. Writers closer to the event describe the totality of it with something close to disbelief, noting that later visitors found no ruins standing on land at all, only water where a city used to be. By ancient estimate, as many as 10,000 people, essentially the entire population, died that night. No time to flee, no understanding of what was happening beneath their feet. The shaking stops. Someone stumbles out of a collapsed doorway, dazed, trying to process what just happened to their home. And before they can even orient themselves, the sea itself rises up and finishes what the earthquake started. For the ancient Mediterranean world, Helike became a benchmark disaster, referenced again and again as proof of nature's power over even the mightiest cities. The traveler and writer Pausanias, touring Greece a few centuries later, recorded local accounts of the destruction and noted something remarkable. The ruins were still visible beneath the water long afterward, not decayed to nothing, but recognizable, submerged, eerily intact. Fishermen in the region told stories for generations of glimpsing a bronze statue of Poseidon still standing upright underwater, gripping his trident. Fishing nets reportedly snagged on submerged walls and columns, dragging up fragments of a city that officially no longer existed but clearly, physically, still did, just out of reach beneath the surface. This matters because it means Helike wasn't a story people told to explain something distant and vague. There was tangible, repeated, physical evidence for generations. People could point at the water and say, that's where it happened, that's where it still lies. It's part of what separates Helike from Atlantis, which exists only in Plato's philosophy as an invented allegory. Helike had a real location, a documented political history, coinage, a real population, and a witnessed catastrophic end. And that overlap with Atlantis is worth sitting on for a moment, because it may explain why this story still feels so eerily familiar even if you've never heard the name Helike before. Plato wrote his account of Atlantis in the 4th century BC, describing a powerful city that angered the gods through pride and was destroyed and swallowed by the sea in a single catastrophic night of earthquakes and flooding. That description mirrors what you just heard almost exactly. A serious academic theory, not internet speculation, holds that Plato may have drawn directly on the real, still recent destruction of Helike when writing Atlantis. Helike's fall happened decades before Plato wrote, was common knowledge across Greece, involved a coastal city swallowed by the sea as apparent punishment for impiety, and left behind ruins people claimed they could still see. If you were a philosopher looking for a real, dramatic example to build a moral allegory around, you wouldn't need to invent one. You'd only need to look at what had just happened to one of the most sacred cities in Greece. This doesn't make Helike and Atlantis the same place. Plato's Atlantis is a massive island civilization beyond the Pillars of Hercules, a deliberately larger-than-life construction built to argue a philosophical point. But the emotional DNA is unmistakable. A proud power, annihilated in a single night, sunk into the sea. Helike may be the closest real historical anchor we have to one of the most enduring legends in Western storytelling. For nearly 24 centuries, Helike stayed a legend with no confirmed location. Ancient sources placed it along the Gulf of Corinth, but exactly where beneath the water, or whether it was even still underwater after millennia of shifting coastline and silting, was a genuine mystery. Expeditions searched the seabed for decades, reasonably assuming, given the ancient descriptions of a city dragged into the sea, that the ruins would be found offshore like a shipwreck. They found other submerged sites nearby, but never Helike itself. Then, gaining real momentum in the 1990s, archaeologist Dora Katsonopoulou and her team asked a different question. What if Helike wasn't at sea at all anymore? What if, over 24 centuries of earthquakes and river sediment, the coastline itself had shifted so much that the site was no longer underwater, but now buried under dry land near the modern town of Agen? It was a bold reframing, and it worked. Instead of diving offshore, the team excavated inland, in a low-lying coastal plain, and what they found changed everything we thought we knew about the disaster. They uncovered building foundations, roof tiles, pottery and coins dating precisely to the classical period, matching Helike's timeline exactly. More importantly, they found clear geological evidence of liquefaction, the process where violently shaken, waterlogged ground briefly behaves like liquid swallowing structures whole, alongside evidence of marine flooding consistent with a tsunami. The physical evidence in the ground lined up almost perfectly with what ancient writers had described over 2,000 years earlier. The city hadn't drifted out to sea intact like a sinking ship. It was shattered by the earthquake, partially swallowed by liquefied ground, then buried and reburied over centuries by shifting river deltas, ending up entombed on what is now dry land a short distance from the coast. This didn't just solve a location mystery. It confirmed that ancient historians, writing centuries closer to the event, hadn't been exaggerating. They'd been remarkably accurate. Ongoing excavation has also revealed that this stretch of coastline was settled as far back as the early Bronze Age, meaning people lived here, and likely faced repeated earthquakes and flooding, for well over 1,000 years before 373 BC. That's because the Gulf of Corinth is one of the most seismically active regions in Europe, a rift zone where the Earth's crust is actively pulling apart, making earthquakes here not a rare anomaly but a geological inevitability. In a strange twist, the same instability that destroyed Helike is what preserved it so well, sealing the site under protective sediment instead of leaving it exposed to centuries of erosion or looting. But step back from the archaeology for a second, because it's easy to lose the human weight of this under the dates and the science. On an ordinary night, families were asleep in their homes. Children, parents, elders, craftsmen, priests, fishermen, living completely normal lives, with no idea they were living through the final hours of their world. There was no evacuation, no warning that translated into action in time. Just the sudden violence of shaking ground, followed within moments by a wall of water that erased the city so thoroughly that later visitors reportedly couldn't even identify where certain buildings had stood. 10,000 lives, gone in the time it takes to wake up, realize something is wrong, and try and fail to run. The Greeks processed this through religion, an angry god punishing impiety because that gave the tragedy a cause, a lesson, something future generations could theoretically avoid by treating suppliants and the gods with more respect. We understand the mechanism differently now: plate tectonics, fault lines, liquefaction, tsunami dynamics, but the emotional core hasn't moved an inch in 24 centuries. A community believed itself permanent, right up until the moment nature proved, without warning and without mercy, exactly how wrong that belief was. Today, the coastal plain near Agen gives almost nothing away on the surface. There's no dramatic ruin, no marker announcing that one of the ancient world's most sacred cities lies entombed in the soil nearby. The Helike project continues excavating the site, piecing together the story of the people who lived there before the disaster, and the survivors who eventually resettled the region afterward, even if it never regained the prestige of housing one of Poseidon's great temples. What's left more than 2,000 years later is a story that works as myth, as history, as warning, and as scientific case study all at once. Ancient philosophers used it to illustrate the danger of arrogance. It may have quietly shaped one of the most famous legends in Western civilization, and modern archaeology has now proven, layer by layer, that it was never a legend at all. It was a real night when the earth opened and the sea rose, and a city full of ordinary people who assumed tomorrow was guaranteed was gone before sunrise. Somewhere under that quiet coastal plain, a bronze Poseidon may still be standing in the dark, gripping a trident no one has seen in 24 centuries. If a story like that deserves to be remembered, hit like. Subscribe if you want more of history's forgotten catastrophes uncovered like this one, and tell me in the comments, after Helike, which drowned or buried city should I dig up next?